Hello everyone, I am the Commander Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of the Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a new commander from Tarkir Dragonstorm, Eshki Dragonclaw. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel at no extra cost to you. But the very best way you can help out the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck techs, gifts, and more for as little as $1. You can also become a channel member for just 99 cents. Show off your support with a logo next to your name and exclusive emojis. Or you can always just support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Eshki is a 4/4 human warrior with Vigilance, Trample, and Ward 1 for 1 generic, 1 green, 1 blue, and 1 red. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you both cast a creature and non-creature spell in your turn by them, you draw a card and put 2 +1/+1 counters on Eshki. This might seem like a massive hoop to jump through, but you can achieve this in many ways. You can build her with a ton of cheap cantrips and cheap creatures in order to always pump her and draw a card. Or you can build her with adventures, which is where I went. Why adventures? Because you can first cast the adventure half of the card and then cast the creature half from exile all in the same pre-combat main phase. So, with a single card you can trigger Eshki. You just need the mana to pull it off in the same turn. Or, you can cast a regular creature and then an adventure spell, or a non-creature spell and then cast a creature from exile. You could definitely set this up in many different ways. In any case, the goal of the deck is to pump Eshki as much as possible and swing face to win via commander damage, all while casting adventure spells that provide advantage or interaction to later on be bodies for attacking or chump blocking. With so many adventure cards in this color and identity, I focused on those that had the main aspects of what decks need: mana acceleration, card advantage, and interaction. But they had to also be cheap enough where I could cast most of them within the same turn. Rosethorn Acolyte, Brightcap Badger, and Cullen Inquisitive Prodigy all have some form of mana acceleration. Sending the Acolyte on an adventure returns our mana as any color, which can then be used to help cast it from exile. In that sense, it costs only 3 total mana to trigger Eshki. The Badger creates 2 Saproling tokens when sent on an adventure, but then, once in play, you can tap Saprolings and Fungi for green mana. And you create a Saproling at the end of your turn. It does cost a whopping 7 mana to do all at once, but if you parse it out, you can get advantage from it. Kellen gives us a clue and extra land drop when sent on an adventure, serving as card advantage as well. It's then interaction as a creature, destroying an artifact when it attacks. Having flying and vigilance makes it an amazing 4-drop as well. Questing Druid and James Wandering Dad also provide card advantage when sent on an adventure. Fortunately, the impulse drop provided by the Druid lasts until our next turn, and for a total of 4 mana, we can send it on an adventure and back, potentially triggering Eshki. James is usually mana sunk at the beginning of the end step before our turn in order to get a ton of clues. But then we could cast him from exile on a later turn, either before or after casting a non-creature spell to trigger Eshki. Elusive Otter, Sea Hag, and Two-Headed Hunter provide ways of making Eshki even more dangerous. The Otter can pump our whole board as a mana sink. Then we just need to leave up a single blue mana in order to trigger Eshki. The Hag makes both Eshki and an additional creature unblockable for just 3 mana. Afterwards, when the creature form enters the battlefield, it weakens opponents' boards for when we have enough creatures to swing in with. The Hunter is an instant speed way to end any opponent if Eshki goes through by giving her double strike. It does cost a whopping 5 mana to cast afterwards, but at least it's a 5/4 with Menace, which isn't nothing. Hypnotic Sprite, Emerald Dragon, Sapphire Dragon, Scalding Viper, Bonecrusher Giant, Vantress Transmuter, Ettercap, Illithid Harvester, Stormkilled Vanguard, and Merfolk Creeper all provide some form of interaction or disruption. These are amazing adventures, and while not as optimal as non-synergistic cards that do the same, those are all also still in the deck anyways. Unfortunately, the first 3 are more than often cast outside of our turn. Being able to counter spells and effects are important. That being said, once in exile, we can later cast them when we need that creature spell to trigger Eshki. Also, being flyers makes them great for attacks and blocks. Sending the Viper on an adventure balances a non-land permanent, which is amazing if later followed up with a counterspell. However, it's also great at getting rid of potential blockers that can stop Eshki from getting through. Then, for just an extra 2 mana, we can cast it from exile, triggering Eshki. On top of that, it has a nice bonus via a triggered ability that can hurt opponents when they cast cheap spells. The Transmuter and Harvester can also do with potential blockers by tapping them down. The Human also curses it with a roll even though it's a single target. However, since the roll removes all abilities and makes the enchanted creature a 1/1, this also serves as removal. Casting again in the same turn can be a bit taxing since it's 4 mana for a 3/4, but the deck has plenty of ways to reduce casting costs and accelerate mana. The Hammer is an amazing mana sink, being able to hit multiple creatures depending on X. It can then nerf them all as face down 2/2s, which is also similar to the Curse effect. This card is amazing here even if you're more than likely not casting both aspects in the same turn. Bone Crusher Giant not only deals with cheap utility creatures at instant speed, but can prevent damage from being prevented. This goes for protection as well as fog effects. Good luck preventing lethal commander damage after casting this. It's also relatively cheap to cast from exile right afterwards, triggering Eshki as well as providing a nice 4/3. This card is absolutely busted. Ettercap destroys a flyer at instant speed. Evasion plays a huge role in the format, especially on commanders. Being able to destroy one at instant speed for 3 mana is amazing. A 2/5 with reach for 5 mana ain't nothing to write home about, but at least it's a good enough adventure card for the deck. The Vanguard naturalizes at sorcery speed as the drawback for being an adventure, but that's fine since we can then cast another creature before or afterwards to trigger Eshki. It does cost a whopping 6 mana as a creature, but it's a 6/7 with evasion against weenies, so there's also that. Last but not least is the Merfolk. While this one is definitely nothing to write home about, you can trigger Eshki for just 2 blue mana. It mills an opponent for 4 and then is a 0/4. It does have its uses as a corner case as they might be, but you can't go wrong with giving your commander 2 +1/+1 counters and drawing a card for just 2 blue mana. For that reason alone, it's worth a slot in the deck. Aquatic Alchemist and Kali Caller are the last adventure cards in the deck, and these provide recovery. The Elemental allows us to return imported instants or sorceries such as counter spells or protective spells. It's also cheap enough to cast from exile in the same turn right after sending it on an adventure, letting us trigger Eshki. The Hunter lets us cast a creature from our graveyard by exiling it. This matters significantly, not just for its own ability, but for other abilities within the deck. When we control its creature part, it's a 7/7 Trampler for 7 mana, but also lets us cast a creature spell from exile for free once each turn. Absolutely amazing for Eshki. In a sense, it's like unlocking Warp Space, whether by casting it for that half or unlocking it later after having cast Charred Foyer first. In any case, both rooms are amazing in this deck. The left half gives us Impulsive Draw, while the second half lets us cast an exile spell for free once per turn, further helping the adventure strategies of the deck. The deck also has plenty of payoffs to make the most of these adventure cards. For example, Lucky Clover further helps the adventure strategies of the deck by copying instant and sorcery adventure spells. Granted, only 1/5 of the deck can trigger this, but getting this early on does so much work. When making cuts for the deck, it survived and actually performed well during testing. Passionate Archaeologist burns an opponent when casting the creature from exile. However, this won't only trigger off of casting creatures that were sent on adventures, since the deck also has a handful of ways to impulse draw, making this card even better, especially when cast early on since it only costs 2 mana. Temur Sabertooth is an amazing card since it can help us recycle our adventure creatures. Not only can it help protect key creatures by bouncing them and then becoming indestructible itself, but at the end of the turn before ours, we can bounce a creature with adventure if we don't have any left in our hand. That way we can guarantee triggering Eshki every turn. So good. Extraordinary Journey synergizes not just with our adventure cards, but also serves as interaction. Sure, opponents can recast their exiled creatures later, but when they enter the battlefield this way, we get to draw a card. Even if it's once per turn, so long as we exiled at least one key creature from an opponent, we can draw a card each turn because it'll also trigger on opponent's turns. Or you can sink as much mana as you can into exile to a ton of blockers to guarantee Eshki getting through. On top of that, it'll also trigger whenever we cast a creature sent on an adventure. This card is amazing here. Edgewall Innkeeper, Storyteller Pixie, Beast Whisperer, Archmage Emeritus, and Archmage of Runes also provide card advantage tied to adventures. Well, the first two are tied directly to adventures, so their inclusion was pretty obvious. But Beast Whisperer getting triggered off of each creature spell we cast is still useful because the deck has other creatures besides those with adventures. Same goes with the Archmages. They'll not only trigger off of adventure spells, but off of any other instant or sorcery we cast. As a bonus, Archmage of Runes also discounts the cost of our instants and sorceries. Speaking of mana discounts, Doc Arlok, Grizzle Genius, Shadow in the Warp, and Temur Battlecrier do the same thing. Doc Arlok discounts each spell we cast from exile. Not being limited to once per turn means that each creature we cast from an adventure will cost 2 generic less. This is so powerful here, especially on a 2-drop. The Battlecrier also significantly reduces the cost of our creatures on an adventure since the reduction will almost always be 2, since it has 4 power and so does Eshki. However, that's just the floor since we could potentially have more ferocious creatures. The enchantment also reduces by 2 generic but only the first creature spell we cast. But that's fine since it has a bonus ability of also picking opponents for the first non-creature spell they cast per turn. In any case, the deck is still running spells like Farseek, Nature's Lore, 3 Visits into the North, and Rapid Growth, since you can't go wrong with land-based mana acceleration. Extra lands will always be a busted strategy since land destruction is so frowned upon in the format. Sword of the Animus and Bitterthorn Nissus Animus are included for the same reason, especially since the deck is somewhat Voltron with our commander. Not only do they pump our commander, but trigger on attack should something happen to prevent us getting through. Going back to card advantage, Jorian Ruin Diver and Crom Violent Cacophony have a Proto Flurry trigger drawing us a card whenever we cast our spec and spell a turn. Fortunately, these aren't as limited as Eshki since they can be both creature or non-creature spells. In any case, they provide more card draw along the same vein. As a bonus, Crom also gains a +1/+1 counter. While not as powerful as Eshki, it is nice to have some redundancy, especially on a flyer. Soul's Majesty and Richkar's Expertise are included to make the most of our massive commander. Unfortunately, since Eshki is a human, we can't include Return of the Wildspeaker, but that's fine, you'll still get bonus points for chaining Soul's Majesty off of Richkar's Expertise. These spells can draw us so many cards that Reliquary Tower is included just in case. It's so good to include because it doesn't take up a slot in the deck and there's so many incremental card draw effects in the deck that you sort of want to keep a full grip. Especially since a lot of times we're not casting the cards in our hand, but the creatures on an adventure. Since the deck is essentially Voltron via adventures, we need ways to protect Eshki beyond that built-in Ward 1. To that end, the deck is running Commander's Plate, Dragonfire Blade, Giant's Amulet, Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots, Champion's Helm, and Mithril Coat. Since Eshki has built-in Vigilance, Giant's Amulet does a ton of work since she'll never tap down on her own, essentially always guaranteeing her the hexproof. Similarly, Dragonfire Blade is amazing with her since it'll always cost just 1 generic to equip onto her. What's even better about these first 3 equipment is that they only cost 1 mana to cast. So if we wait until we have 5 available mana, casting any of these before or after Eshki during our pre-combat main phase means that Eshki will trigger on her very first turn in play, so keep that in mind because timing is everything. Heroic Intervention is usually cast outside of that, but that's okay because this spell needs to be an evergreen deck anyways. This spell is usually the one being recovered by Aquatic Alchemist as well as being recovered by Mystic Sanctuary. Naturally, you can do so at instant speed in response to drawing a card thanks to 4 of the 7 fetch lands in the deck for that pro gamer move. But the deck has other protective instants like the Suite of Counter Magic, an offer you can't refuse, Swan Song, Negate, and Counterspell. While a board wipe could set us back, more often than not we won't have the largest board in play. That being said, you'd be surprised how often targeted removal is sent to Eshki, so if we don't have any protective equipment on her yet, these do wonders at protecting her. Beast Within, Chaos Warp, and Guthrie Wright's History can deal with most annoying permanents, especially lands like Maze of Ith, but a lot of the times they can also help deal with potential blockers. Speaking of dealing with potential blockers, Rogue's Passage is obviously here. Not much needs to be said about it. It doesn't take up a slot in the deck and can help us eliminate a player with commander damage. Back to Interaction, Evacuation and Blasphemous Act are amazing in this deck. Yes, Evacuation is global, but if we bounce all of our creatures, most of them have adventures. So not only will we recover our board, but we can do so by first casting the adventure spell and then the creature spell afterwards, giving us all of the benefits of doing so. Blasphemous Act will hopefully kill off the entire board except for Eshki. Once she has more than 13 toughness, casting this is as good as killing off an opponent. Karn's Bastion helps us get there faster via Proliferate. Sure, 4 generic and tapping might seem like a hefty mana investment, but it doesn't take up a slot in the deck, plus gives us something to do with our mana at the beginning of the end step before ours. In any case, Soul Ring can help us pay for that 4 along with any other beefy cost. Something worth mentioning along with Soul Ring is that this deck is bracket 2 as of the making of this video. This means that Soul Ring is the only fast mana effect in the deck. But as we saw earlier, land-based wrap along with those cost reduction effects will help us go a long way. Plus there are no game changers in bracket 2, so no need to worry about free counter spells, Teferi's Protection, Cyclonic Rift, etc. So this deck does amazingly well in this environment since it's meant to be quite casual. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. Apart from the previously mentioned ones, the deck's running all 3 Shock lands, all 3 Surveil lands, all 3 Opponent lands, all 3 Snow Duels, Ketria Triumph, Frontier Bivouac, and Command Tower, along with 3 of each snow-covered basic land for all of the land-based wrap effects. Notice that I also refrained from running Ancient Tomb in the deck. That's because, as I was building it, it was the only game changer in it. Removing it made the deck fall into bracket 2, which I feel is a more fitting bracket for this deck and the strategies within. However, as with all my deck techs, you can build your mana base according to your budget. Whether you include more expensive cards or even cheaper cards is up to you. You do you. Similarly, if you want to up the bracket for your own builds, go for it. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Eshki Dragonclaw. What I like about this commander is all the different ways you can build it. I decided to go the adventure route since it seems so fitting. Also, depending on how you see it, that could be a good or a bad thing. Since that adventure obviously isn't an evergreen or even deciduous mechanic, this deck will have very few updates as sets release. That means that it will require less maintenance since the likelihood of new adventure spells being printed in the future is so low. So it's sort of future-proof in that sense. That being said, if you like updating your decks frequently, you might tire of it sooner than later. However, I'm pretty excited with it and I'm even considering building some version of it in real life. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. So make sure you get your Tarkir Dragonstorm singles there. I also want to thank any channel members. Your membership is greatly appreciated. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of the Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Bandit Kirby, and happy brewing.